Welcome. Did that work? Yes, this meeting is being live streamed. So welcome to our financial concepts call on Wednesday. We call it Wealth Wednesday. And we are going to have Tim O'Rourke start out for us today. So Tim, give us the good news.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I think it's mostly afternoon now. So there's a lot going on, as everybody know. We're in an election year. The markets are really feisty. I'll call them feisty right now because there's a lot going on. As we've seen, we're hitting record highs. It's amazing to watch the all three indexes that I really watch closely. The Dow Industrial, which, as you all know, are 30 of the biggest companies in the world, really. And then you've got the S&P 500, which is a broader index, and then you have the Nasdaq, which is even broader. We're hitting daily highs sometimes. The Dow Jones has pulled back a little bit, but Nasdaq is hitting highs. S&P is hitting highs. We've seen new highs all this year. While we have a backdrop of a lot going on behind the scenes, the markets also, remember, they're always forward looking. So they're looking 30, 60, 90, sometimes 6, 7 months in advance of what they think is going to happen. And they're based and predicated on various metrics like the interest rates going up or down. They're muting. They're looking in advance at these metrics, and then they're estimating exactly how that's going to affect different stocks in different sectors. And so right now we're seeing that, obviously the technology side of the industry is, everybody's watching NVIDIA. It's really amazing, and they still think there's another 30% upside to NVIDIA. NVIDIA just notified the market that they haven't even produced the latest upgraded chips that they've already sold, and they're introducing another new chip that's going to be better than the ones that they're now just running off the manufacturing. So it's changing at that pace. And the big unknown, if you all remember back at the turn of the century, I love saying that, now that we're in 2024, turn of the century. That was like back in the 1800s and 1900s. The turn of the century back in 2000, the big internet kind of time, and everybody was afraid of Y2000, and then we had the big market crash back then in 01, 02. There was a lot of concern back then about what the internet was going to be and all the hype of it. And I think AI is artificial intelligence is kind of running into that same kind of pattern. I don't know if it'll be exactly the same, but there's a lot of implications here of what AI is actually going to be from a profitability perspective for companies, and how it's going to basically roll out and improve our lives, how it's going to improve products, how it's going to improve the medical community. If we look at everything AI is supposed to do, we think it could change the investment world in 5 years. But one thing I can assure you it's not going to do, it's not going to change anything that we do. It's not going to change anything that you do. So always remember that what you do is you are the interface. We are the interface between the financial services market and people out there in America, Main Street America. What you do is such an important aspect of this job. Now, I also want to talk about some things going on that are very important, that are going to be, I think, the trigger for this market correction that I believe is coming. Probably, let's face it, politically, the market right now is being manipulated by the politics at hand right now. The party in power, they don't want a market correction when they go into November to elect a new president. So I think we're going to see the markets either go sideways or stay elevated, and they're going to do that by completely keep spending money. They're going to keep spending money on repairing the roads, on infusing capital into the banking system, into creating more jobs. Any way they can is kind of, and any party's going to do that. It doesn't matter who's in power. And so that's why I think this sometime in the first quarter, second quarter of 2025 is probably when we're going to see the correction start to take hold and take place. Now, here's the other thing is, as of January 1, 2025, remember the tax deductions of the Trump administration are going to sunset. So all the tax deductions are going to go away as of the first of year in January 1 of 2025. So that's a big deal. We're still at, massive deficit spending right now. We're at record deficits on credit cards. So you can kind of see the buildup happening, but unemployment is still low. So we're going to see this carry through, I think, until the end of this year. Kimberly, the other thing I want to talk about is basically the annuities. Since we've seen the rise of interest rates, annuities have become very popular. There's currently right now in the variable annuity assets about $2.3 trillion sitting there in those assets. In the fixed index annuities, there's about 600 billion sitting there. And then out of the 2.3 trillion in the variable annuities, there's about 70% that are out of their surrender charge. Now think about that for a second. When you're out talking with people, that 70% of people, anybody who owns a variable annuity, 70% of those assets now are without a surrender charge. And now that we have, the index annuities, it might be a safer place to start to reposition assets with these newer products. So that's a conversation you need to have. That's a conversation that's a discussion you need to uncover when you do a financial needs analysis. That's something that the industry, it makes a lot of sense, and you have to justify when you do a 1035 transfer into another product like that. But I think it makes a lot of sense. And we're seeing historic moves right now as far as volume in index annuities as we get to a 15-year cycle right now in a bull market. Variable products and people in the market, it's probably not the best place to be for all your assets. So this is a good time to reposition some assets and put them into a safer kind of position, especially as people get a little older, they're looking into retirement kind of situations. I think we're going to see index annuities, even the sales numbers go up higher and higher. What we're seeing also, and this is from LIMRA, which is the life insurance industry organization that basically tracks all this, is we're seeing traditional variable annuity sales trailing down lower and lower. And this is through the broker-dealer community. The registered broker-dealers out there are selling less and less variable annuities and more index annuities, which is telling us something. There's a trend going on here, which we need to pay attention to, because we're sitting here at the right time in the right place. And I think it's so important that we pay attention to these kind of trends, that people are looking for protection. They're looking for, how do we protect our assets going into retirement? How do we give our assets to our children? How do we pass assets on securely, effectively, efficiently? And that's through life insurance. So I think there's a lot of trends going on here, Kimberly, that point to the direction of the industry we're in and give us a lot of credibility for what we do. So that's my report for today. Back over to you.
Thank you. I always appreciate your daily text, and I always love to hear your opinion and information that you share with us about what's happening in the markets today. I think it's a big deal, and the more we're informed as a team, the better we're going to be as advisors, right? Talking to our clients, talking to people, the more current our conversations are. So today, I told Taurus earlier, he was early, so I gave him a little spoiler alert. You aren't going to hear from me. You're going to hear from this unbelievably amazing lady. And it's going to be a video, but that's okay. It's just like she's here, right? But she's unbelievably amazing. I've watched it twice already, so if that tells you anything. And it's talking about how will the 2024 election affect our retirement plans. And I think it's really important that you listen clearly and carefully to everything she has to say. I learned several things from her. You guys will learn several things from her. And she speaks to me at a very elementary level. So it's not like this overwhelming conversation of like, what did she say? I think it's very easy to listen to and to understand. I will give you another spoiler alert. This video is like 50 minutes, so I'll fast forward a couple of minutes of it, but we're going to be on here at least until 1. And those of you that want to stay, if you have questions or anything afterwards, then we will open it up to that. So just understand that that's what we're doing today, and it is going to be amazing when I actually find the video that I had pulled up. So give me half a second. There it is. It's because my YouTube live was in the middle of it. Okay. So here we go. We'll go ahead and go. Actually, let me stop this share for a second because I didn't enable my sound. Okay. Some of you might have seen it already. I doubt it because I know most people don't actually watch these videos, but it's fantastic.
Life insurance. That thing, no.
Government relations and strategic communications. Becky has also handled communications for several U.S. congressmen and government agencies and has worked in the White House press office in Washington, D.C. Becky is a very experienced and knowledgeable leader and will have valuable insights to share.
If you can't hear this, somebody text me, or I don't think there's a chat on here. So somebody text me if you can't hear it. I'm going to play it again.
Share with us today. We will also have time for questions at the end, so please feel free to submit any in the Q&A function as the webinar unfolds. Becky, thank you so much for your time today, and I'll turn it over to you to kick us off.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. And now we're going to see if I can talk to you, look at you, and share my screen successfully at the same time. You know, that really is in 2024, the mark of a presenter. I did it. That's all. You know, what more could you guys ask? Okay. So, Sam mentioned my background is in Washington. I worked in the Bush White House for George W. Bush during his first administration, and then over on Capitol Hill for the Speaker of the House and a couple different members of Congress. And what was interesting to me was during my time in Washington, I just realized something. And what occurred to me during that period of my life was this. You know, the average U.S. saver has no idea the kind of impact that the decisions that are being made in Washington could have on the success or failure of their retirement approach. You know, all of our clients are, trying to do their best job saving for retirement and preparing their assets for the future and figuring out their legacy. But all of those decisions just exist in this ecosystem that is prescribed to us from Washington. Now, that's a great benefit to us. And it's a great benefit because I truly believe that the most exciting times in our industry as financial professionals occur when you have this environment and this product that just perfectly align. And that is what I feel is happening right now in 2024 with everything that's going on with the election, taxes, spending in the country, and of course, Index Universal Life as part of a strategy for your clients. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to look a little bit at the 2024 election, what it might mean for your clients. How do you help frame up this story? How do you help your clients understand things like tax and legislative risk? And of course, how can you help plug IUL in as a solution to some of these challenges that they're facing right now? So thanks so much for joining us. I'm a big fan. I will say this at the jump. We're going to talk about the 2024 election, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that most of your clients, most of the people that sit across from you in your office every day, do not plan to be retired for the next 4 years, right? They plan to be retired for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, some of them even 50 years into the future. And that means what really matters to your clients is not necessarily who wins in November. It's important, but that's not the most important thing. When it comes to the long-term success or failure of your client's retirement approach, what is most important about the 2024 election is what direction does it show our nation leading it? And what does the outcome of the election mean for the nation's long-term tax, economic, and spending environment? So that's what I want to get into today. Now, tax risk obviously is a risk that we as financial professionals know very well, but it's not a risk that is particularly well understood when it comes to a lot of American savers. And here's why I think that is. When most of our clients are thinking about the risk of taxes in retirement, they tend to think about things that are personal to themselves. This is what I like to call situational ways that their taxes can change. So that means how much income would I need in retirement and what tax bracket does that put me in? Or maybe am I filing jointly and then at some point in retirement, am I becoming a widow and then filing at a single rate? Those are all important, but they are not a complete ways or a complete list of ways that taxes can change in retirement. Because the other way taxes can change has nothing to do with your clients as individuals. It's all about legislative changes coming from Washington. Now, the 2024 election this year gives us a great opportunity to communicate about the kinds of changes that can happen in retirement. So I'm going to go ahead and talk through some of what I see coming out of Washington, how we can frame it up for our clients, and how we can use IUL to help offset some of these risks. At the end of the webinar, I'll also give you an election year toolkit that you can use. It's been compliance reviewed by North American. It has all sorts of great materials, brochures, handouts, different things that you can use to help communicate these topics with your clients in an election year. So stay tuned. All right, but let's get into what is happening in America today. So I'm a government geek, but I also truly believe that there are very simple and meaningful ways that we can communicate what's happening in Washington to our clients. You don't have to be a government geek and your clients don't have to be a government geek to understand how Washington can impact your retirement. And I like to start the story here. So this is a report from the Congressional Budget Office that they put out every year. Every year, the CBO looks at the previous fiscal year and gives a full accounting of every dollar that our government took in terms of revenue and every dollar that our government spent in terms of expenditures. It's kind of wild. All of this is public data, and they do a really nice job compiling it and presenting it. So each March, this comes out. These numbers are just came out last month. This is the CBO report for fiscal year 2023, the last fiscal year. And it sheds tons of insight into why taxes may rise for your clients in retirement. So let's look at 2023, fiscal year by the numbers. In 2023, our government took in $4.4 trillion of revenue. Now, primarily this revenue comes in through the individual income taxes that you and your clients and we all pay. Over half of all federal revenue is individual income tax based. Now, 4.4 trillion. It's funny. I've got twin 12-year-olds at home. And this weekend I was looking through this report, just this presentation, making sure all these numbers were updated. And my daughter looked at this and was like, Mom, $4.4 trillion is like a lot of money, right? And I was like, yeah, honey, that is a lot of money. Unless you spend more than $4.4 trillion a year, right? Like I can't tell you if your practice is doing well just on what you take in. I need to know what you take in and what you spend to see if you're on sound fiscal footing. So this is where the story gets interesting. Let's look at the other side of the ledger. We took in $4.4 trillion as a nation. What did we spend? Well, the first category of spending is what we call mandatory government spending. Now, mandatory spending is spending that is codified by current law. Congress, the White House, no one, they don't have any control over this spending. This is just the obligations our government owes to its citizens based on the laws as they stand today. By far, the two largest pieces of mandatory spending in our country, Medicare and Social Security. All right. So mandatory spending alone, fiscal year 2023, we were in it for about $3.8 trillion. Now, there's one other area of government spending which Congress and the White House cannot control. And that is, of course, the nation has a very large debt, and every year we have to pay interest on that debt. So we have net interest that we pay as part of our debt service. In fiscal year 2023, we paid about $600 billion of debt service on the federal debt. which gave us a grand total of total non-discretionary spending, $4.4 trillion. Now, I'm sure you can start to see the problem here. Our government took in $4.4 trillion, and before Congress even met, before they gavelled in a session or passed a single piece of legislation, we had already spent all of that money. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if Congress didn't spend any money, but of course, as we all know, Congress does spend money. This is what we call discretionary spending, and it's really made up of two pieces. The first piece is all the appropriation bills that our government passes to fund the government. And the second piece is any supplemental spending, these spending packages that they just are targeted on a specific idea or priority. Now, it's easy to say, wow, our government, Congress, they spend too much money, they should spend less. But a lot of this discretionary spending is actually funding things we need as a nation. So discretionary spending covers Department of Defense and the defense of our nation. It covers a road, bridge, transportation, and infrastructure funding. Lots of stuff wrapped up in this. In the last fiscal year, it was about $1.7 trillion of discretionary funding out of Congress for a grand total of $6.1 trillion. Now, I wish I could see all your faces, but I'm gonna bet that if I asked who on this call has completed second grade math, everyone's hands goes up, right? So I'm going to assume we all know subtraction. And we can look at $4.4 trillion coming in and $6.1 trillion going out and very quickly see that here's the problem. We have a $1.7 trillion gap between what the nation takes in and what we spend. And this is what we call the federal deficit. And this is not unique to last year. Over the past 10 years, our federal deficit usually comes in somewhere between 1.2 trillion and about $1.8 trillion. This is part of the reason that our national debt right now is at the highest level it has ever been in history, over $34 trillion now. So why does this all matter to your clients? This is not sustainable. Over the long run, we cannot keep running deficits of this size and driving the debt up. In fact, over the mid and near term, it's really not sustainable. So Congress is going to have to do something. And the question is, what will they do and will it impact your clients? So let's go back to this equation. Where can we affect change as a nation? Well, the first thing we could do is get our mandatory spending under control. If we spent less on these mandatory programs, this is by far the largest piece of federal spending that we have. The challenge is, if you remember, I said the two biggest pieces of mandatory spending for the US, Social Security and Medicare. It's interesting, actually, between the 2010 and the 2020 census, we had the most rapid growth of citizens in America age 65 plus that we've had since the 1800s. Over the last 100 plus years in America, we have never had this much of the population age 65 plus. So obviously, getting Social Security or Medicare spending dramatically under control, that is going to be very hard, not to mention politically kind of out of favor. All right, so if we can't get mandatory spending under control, maybe we could pay a little less interest on our debt. Not a huge piece of the equation, but it would help. The challenge is, if you look at calendar year 2023, we actually ended up spending almost $1 trillion just servicing the debt. Many experts believe 2024 will be the first year where we spend over $1 trillion just servicing our debt, which is wild. If you think about it, 20 years ago, did we even think in trillions of dollars? Now that's just the interest that we're owing on the debt. Obviously, our debt is very large and it is accruing interest at a higher rate as interest rates are up right now. So it's going to be very hard to get that under control. All right, so we can't get mandatory spending under control. We really can't reduce the interest that we pay on our debt. Here's an idea. Congress could spend less money. Yeah, I can sense you all laughing. Obviously, that is not a serious response. Here's the thing. It's not just that Congress won't spend less money. It has become hard in recent years for Congress not to spend more money. If you remember, in January of this year, the Republicans and Democrats were fighting because we were coming up on a government shutdown deadline. So every year, Congress has to pass 12 appropriations bills to fund the government. Many years they don't pass them. So instead, they have to pass these omnibus or continuing resolutions to fund the government. So the previous year, our government had been funded at $1.6 trillion. And for weeks and weeks, days and nights, Republicans and the Democrats fought tooth and nail to get funding for this year set at $1.66 trillion. It was an increase. I can't emphasize enough that the debate in Washington is not about reducing spending in Congress. It's about slowing the growth of spending that is coming out of Congress. In addition, we have seen in recent years Congress passing trillions of dollars in additional funding outside of the regular appropriations process. So if you remember, in 2020, we had the CARES Act. That was the pandemic economic stimulus bill, about $3.5 trillion of additional spending. In 2021, we had what was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was about another $1.7 trillion. 2022, we had a $700 and maybe $40 billion Inflation Reduction Act, and so on and so on. We are seeing right now a trend in Washington where not only is the appropriations process growing in terms of funds, but they're passing trillions of dollars of additional funding most years. Well, here's where we are. We can't reduce mandatory spending. We can't reduce our interest. We can't reduce discretionary spending. There's only one place left to go, and that is driving more revenue. And that means taxes. Remember, over half of all revenue our government receives comes from individual income taxes that we all pay. That's where we're heading. Now, it's a good question. Could it impact my clients, right? Like, yes, the country is in dire kind of fiscal situation here, but what does it really mean for my clients and their retirement approach? Now, it's interesting that I think if you sat down with every client or prospect that you met with for the next couple of weeks, and you asked them, how will all this impact me? A lot of them would say, I don't know that it will. And I think it's because they consistently hear messages like this. Oh, this is just a problem for the ultra, ultra wealthy. Don't worry, no one making less than $400,000 a year will have their taxes raised, period. I know you guys have all heard this. This was in the president's State of the Union. We heard this on the campaign trail. We've heard this in the halls of Congress. The challenge is, it is a promise that our government cannot keep. The challenges that we face are not necessarily political. They are demographic and mathematical. That is what is having to drive tax decisions in Washington. Here's the challenge with this promise. If we only raise taxes on people making $400,000 a year or more, it impacts about 39% of income tax revenue. Put another way, people that make over $400,000 pay about 39% of federal income taxes. But here's the thing, if instead we could raise taxes on people making $200,000 and above, that impacts almost 70% of federal income tax revenue. And here's the kicker that I think we need to pay attention to. If we can raise taxes on people making $100,000 a year or above, anyone making a six-figure income, that impacts almost 90% of federal income tax revenue. It's interesting. I don't know if anyone knows the Cato Institute. They're a think tank out of Washington. Cato came out with a report last year where they evaluated what would happen if we had a new tax bracket rate for any dollars made over $500,000. And that new bracket rate was 100%. Any dollar you made over $500,000, the government would get 100% of it in the form of taxes. And you know what the study found? Even with that 100% rate for high income earners, we could not close the annual deficit. We'd still have about a $600 billion deficit each year. Tax reform is going to have to be broader based. And that's why I think all of your clients, especially any clients expecting to need kind of six-figure income, either now or in retirement, needs to pay attention. So let's look at a couple ways that taxes could be higher in the future than planned. And then let's look at how this could impact your clients, because I'm sure many of your clients, like most Americans, have saved large parts of their retirement assets in these tax deferred vehicles and 401ks and IRAs and 403bs, right? But what they don't realize is that when they saved in these tax deferred vehicles, they made a bet that their taxes in retirement would be lower than their taxes are today. It's the point of deferring their taxes. But a lot of them haven't evaluated, is that true? And just as importantly, if it's not true, if my taxes are the same or even higher in retirement than they are today, will my retirement approach still be okay? And that's what we want to help them do. So I want to look at a couple ways taxes could rise on our clients. These are great questions to ask your clients if they feel like any of these could impact them. So by far, the way most American savers think about their taxes changing in retirement is through tax bracket changes. Now, we actually know that all of our tax bracket rates are going up in 2026. How do I know that? I don't have a magic ball. I really wish I did. But I remember that in 2017, Congress passed and the president signed into law comprehensive tax reform, sometimes called the Trump tax cuts. We all remember them. And those tax cuts reduced individual income tax rates for millions of Americans. I would bet everyone on this call and all of our clients. But what we have to remember is that those tax bracket rate reductions were not permanent. And they sunset, they expire in 2025, which means that unless Congress acts to extend them, all of our bracket rates are reverting to their older higher rates come 2026. Now, while that's a depressing thought that our taxes today are actually low, it's also a good opportunity for communicating with your clients. I mentioned that 2024 is a key year to be leveraging what is going on to help your clients understand taxes in retirement and the role IUL can play. Well, if your clients are considering changing the tax status of any of their retirement assets, they can actually do so right now at a discount. But it is a limited window because those artificially low tax bracket rates that we're in today because of that Tax Cut and Jobs Act, those are all going away after next year. So let's leverage that for 2024, help our clients make really good decisions. It's funny, I actually used to just kind of move forward now, go to the next slide, but then the first question that would always pop up in the chat was like, okay, Becky, you said tax rates could kind of go up. How much are they going up? We don't have a magic ball. Obviously, we cannot predict the future, but there are a couple ways we can look back at history and see where rates might go. Let history kind of inform what might be coming down the line. To do that, I like to use something called middle quintile income. Now, we've already established I'm a bit of a government geek. I spend a lot of time looking at Census Bureau reports, and this is one of my favorite metrics that they use. The middle quintile is really simple. Here's what the Census Bureau does. They take all household incomes in America and just stick them in 5 buckets. The people with the highest household income are in the top quintile. The people with the lowest household incomes are in the bottom quintile. And the people with the middle amount of income are in the, you've guessed it, not a trick question, the middle quintile. I love looking at middle quintile tax data because it says for average Americans, what are their tax rates like now versus in the past? So the most recent year we have full quintile data for is 2020. That's under today's current tax bracket rate environment, post-Trump tax cuts. So if we look at 2020 and then we just take it 20 years back to 2000, let's see what happens. For middle quintile households, in 2000, they were paying at a 28% bracket rate. Today, that rate is 22%. That means that middle quintile tax bracket rates in the 2000 were actually 30% higher than they are today, which means tax bracket rates could go up by 30%. And we wouldn't even be in a high tax bracket rate environment. We would just be back to the taxes we were all used to paying in the late 90s and early 2000s. A 30% bump just puts us on par with history. There is so much room for Congress to generate some tax revenue. All right. Tax brackets are undoubtedly the way most of us think about taxes changing in retirement. But of course, they're not the only way. The other way we have to help our clients prepare for are what I like to call Congress gets creative, just new taxes that Congress can come up with. So this includes kind of any way that Congress can find to generate additional tax revenue, specifically in this case from retirement assets or our clients' retirement savings. It's interesting that most savers understand tax risk. Tax risk is the risk that our level of taxation is different in retirement than is planned. Of course, if our level of taxation is higher, if we've deferred all of our taxes to retirement, that means every dollar we take out of our accounts, more of it is going to the IRS in the form of taxes, and less of it is coming to us to spend as income. But equally important is something that I call legislative risk. Legislative risk is not necessarily about the level of taxation. It's about the structure of taxation for retirement. It's about what is taxed, when it's taxed, how it's taxed, and who it's taxed for. So a great example of these kind of new taxes that don't affect tax brackets but could still end up raising the tax bill for our clients is Social Security. So right now, Social Security is taxable up to 85% of that benefit, but it wasn't always that way. Originally, Social Security wasn't taxable. And then in the 80s under Reagan, Congress passed a law making it taxable up to 50%. And then in the 90s under Clinton, Congress passed another law making it taxable up to the current 85%. But here's the thing. Tomorrow, Congress could pass another law making it 100% taxable. Your client's tax bracket doesn't change, but suddenly they have more taxable income being applied against it, which means they have less actual income to spend in retirement. And this is where I think the story has gotten very interesting and where we need to watch the 2024 election closely. So I mentioned I spent a lot of time in government, and one thing that I really loved when I was working in Washington was government fact sheets. Bet you didn't expect that answer. I love government fact sheets so much. They are the great PR documents of our government. So like if you hear someone on Fox News or CNN talking about a piece of legislation being debated in Congress, I guarantee you that reporter did not read 327 pages of legislation. They downloaded the fact sheet and took that summary. The fact sheet says not only what is in a bill, but what is the purpose of that provision. Now, if you remember back in 2021, September, late 2021, House Democrats introduced the Build Back Better legislation. And this was a $3.5 trillion bill full of kind of the greatest hits. I mean, transportation infrastructure funding, universal pre-K, green energy tax credits. It was all in there. Now, to offset that $3.5 trillion, there was also about $2.9 trillion of new taxes in that bill. That was not surprising. Big spending bills are often offset by large tax generating provisions. What was surprising, though, was how much of that $2.9 trillion in new tax revenue was coming out of your clients' retirement accounts. So, September 2021, House Democrats introduced the Build Back Better legislation. I do what any normal person does, immediately rush to the House Ways and Means Committee website and download the government fact sheet. And here in Part 3, modifications to the rules relating to retirement plans, Subpart A, limitations on high-income taxpayers with large account balances, I found this. It said the purpose of this provision is, quote, to avoid subsidizing retirement savings once account balances reach high levels. It stopped me in my tracks. Now, I'm sure everyone on the call is probably a lot like me. You got your first job, you got your first paycheck, and you would have loved to spend that whole paycheck, but you didn't because someone, a mentor, a teacher, a boss, a parent, told you the responsible thing to do was to take a little bit of that money and put it away for retirement. And if you did that paycheck after paycheck, year after year, you'd build a nest egg and have saved for your future. Retirement savings in America has always been the responsible thing to do. But in recent years, we have seen a dramatic attitude shift coming out of Washington. Because now what they're saying is actually hold on a second. At some point, which we Congress will decide, you've actually saved too much for retirement. And now it is no longer responsible, it is greedy. And because of that, the tax code should no longer incentivize it, it should penalize it. And so here's what they proposed. Every American saver would add up all of their retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, Roths accounts, all of them. If the total value of their retirement accounts exceeded a certain level that Congress would set, the government would say, wait, hold on. You've saved too much for retirement, and the tax code should not incentivize that by letting you continue to defer your taxes. And people would have a new required minimum distribution applicable at any age equal to 50% of the excess. Essentially, the government saying, you got to take that money out. You cannot continue to defer taxes on it. Pay your taxes, and now you got to put it somewhere else where it'll be taxed annually. It was a huge change in the way we approach retirement. Now, the good news is that bill did not pass, or that provision did not pass as part of the final bill. So that is not law today. But here's the thing that I remind people all the time. Tax proposals in Washington never, ever die. They just go on the shelf for future use. And I know you think I mean this like theoretical shelf, or just, I'm kind of intuiting there's a shelf. No, there's a real shelf, guys. Every year, the Congressional Budget Office puts out a compendium of reports, and it's called Options to Reduce the Deficit. And they take all the legislative proposals that have not passed Congress, and they put a dollar amount to them, and they put them in these books. And when Congress is building new legislation, and they say, hey, we need $800 billion to offset this provision, they just flip through these books and find $800,000 or $800 billion of new spending. So they say, oh, wait, if we put a new RMD on account balances in retirement accounts, we could generate $600 billion of those dollars. Stick it in. And last month in March, the president rolled out his 2025 budget proposal. And naturally, I went and downloaded the fact sheet. And wouldn't you know, in the fact sheet, here we saw that, quote, reforms to tax-preferred retirement incentives have to be reformed to ensure that the wealthy cannot use these incentives to amass tax-free fortunes in the future. And so what did we see? Oh, that exact same proposal to limit the total amount of retirement assets an American can hold, and then have a new RMD equal to 50% of the excess. It's not dead. Here's the thing. None of our clients want to spend retirement dodging bullets, and we don't want that for them. We don't want every time Congress meets or a new president is elected, we have an election, that our clients are just hoping and praying that maybe provisions that would negatively impact their retirement approach don't make it into the final piece of legislation that got passed. We are not, as financial professionals, in the dodging bullet industry. Our job is to get our clients' assets out of the line of fire. And this is where IUL has a very unique story to tell. Now, when we talk about tax risk, the risk of taxes being higher in the future than we expected, our tax level of taxation, many of your clients, their kind of gut reaction to that is, oh yeah, I could do a Roth conversion. Why don't I have some Roth assets? And that will protect me if tax rates go up in the future. My taxes will already be paid on those assets, and then I can access the funds tax-free. And that is true. But remember, we're not just trying to help our clients protect against tax risk. We also have to help them protect against legislative risk, against the structure of taxation. And while Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks do a great job protecting against the risk that our brackets will be different in the future than they are today, they do nothing to protect against legislative risk, Congress changing the rules. And this is where the IUL story gets very interesting. So a Roth IRA and a Roth 401k, just like a traditional IRA and a traditional 401k, are an account. And when Congress changes the rules on accounts, those rules take immediate effect on all the accounts out there. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think the set of kind of tax rules that your client saved for retirement under are likely to be at least somewhat different than the set of tax rules that they get when they access those funds in retirement. We just saw an example of this actually in 2019 under the Secure Act. You know, it used to be if you inherited an IRA, you could take the money out of that inherited IRA as you pleased and what we call stretch that IRA so that you could choose when you had to pay taxes on those funds. But the Secure Act changed that, right? Now, for the vast majority of people that inherit an IRA, they have to drain that account within 10 years, regardless of what that means for their taxes. Again, Congress didn't change their tax brackets, but because they changed the structure of taxation, and because that took immediate effect on all these IRAs that were in existence today, many, many Americans' inheritance plans kind of got a little kink in them, right? We had to redo some things. IUL is different because, like all life insurance, IUL is not an account. It is a contract. And the courts have upheld time and time again that when Congress changes the rules on a contract, they can change those rules for contracts going forward, but they cannot retroactively apply those changes to contracts that are already in place. And those of you that have been in the industry a while might remember this from the 80s and 90s when the MEC rules came into existence. Going forward, insurance policies that were MECs were taxed differently. But if you had a pre-reform policy, it could be as MECy as you want. It could be the biggest MEC in the world. Doesn't matter. You were grandfathered into the old set of tax rules. This is why in 2024, IUL is such a product that matches perfectly with the environment that we are in. Because not only can it help your clients access supplemental retirement income tax-free, not only can it help them have a death benefit above and beyond the cash value in that account for their heirs tax-free, but it is also immune to these legislative risk of changes. It is a contract, and once it's in place, Congress cannot change the rules on it. And I think that is one of the reasons that, in my opinion, every American saver needs to at least hear the IUL story. They need to at least evaluate how it could help their retirement approach. And I say this truly, that is also originally why I incorporated IUL into my own retirement approach. You know, I have IRA, I've got Roth money, I've got a TSP, which is like a government 401k, but I have a North American IUL policy. And I have it because I wanted to diversify not just against tax risk, but also against that legislative risk. And I know that the funds that are in my policy, I don't care what Congress changes the rules. It will not impact those funds. So before we go to Q&A, I just want to share a couple things. This is one of my favorite quotes. A goal without a plan is just a wish. And I say that because none of our clients want to pay more in taxes when they're retired than necessary. But if they don't have a plan, then that's just a wish. So how do we help them? Let's talk about a couple different ways. So I'm going to put this QR code up here. I put together an election toolkit. It's just a couple resources.
All right, I'm going to fast forward this because we don't need to buy her stuff, much to her chagrin, but the rest of it's still good too.
But I want to end with my favorite quote. This is Judge Learned Hand. Judge Learned Hand was a U.S. Court of Appeals judge. He is actually the most quoted judge by the U.S. Supreme Court. Some people say that's because he is very smart. I also like to think it is because he's very witty. And this is my favorite quote. He says, there are two systems of taxation in this country, one for the informed and one for the uninformed. I hope that after today's webinar and downloading that election toolkit, that you will have the tools that you need to go help
taxes in, say, 40 years.
You know, when I look at kind of the demographic changes in the country, I think we are in a long-term rising tax environment for many years to come. And, you know, it's interesting. I mentioned this a little bit at the jump.
All right, so I'm going to stop this share for a minute and put you guys where I can see you. congrats to those of you that stayed on. I know you're just watching another video, but to me, I think it's like mind-blowing information, right? So we talk about tax risk all the time. We talk about the risk of inflation all the time. We talk about, procrastination risk, but we don't think about legislation risk. And when she said that, when I was watching it the other day, I learned so much from her. But when I was watching that and I heard her say that about, all of our other accounts are all of our other assets are accounts, right? And IUL is a contract. When she said that, she was on here, she's an attorney, but when she said that, it was just like this light bulb that went off in my head that said, wow, you got to be kidding me, right? Obviously, it's a contract and the government upholds contracts because that is a legally binding document, right? So when all of the tax laws change on IRAs, like it did with the Secure Act, it all becomes retroactive on every single account. But when it changes on IULs, if it ever changed on life insurance, it is not a retroactive change because those are accounts that are upheld because it is a contractual agreement, not accounts, but contracts that are upheld because they're contractual agreements. So I learned a ton. I feel like, I know it's a lot of information, but I think the more information you have, the more educated you are to talk to your clients. I'll post the entire link in WhatsApp so you can watch her question and answers at the end, because it's probably about another 10 minutes. So you can fast forward to that and watch her questions and answers. I think those are great as well. You learn a lot from her, people asking real life questions. And one of the questions that they ask at the end, she answered it by saying, well, I'll tell you that all of your senators and all of your representatives, they have cash value life insurance policies. And she said, do you know why? And of course, the North American guy said, no, tell me. And she said, because it's not reportable in their SEC reporting. So typically when you're, an employee of the government like that, you've got to report all of your assets and everything, right, to them so they can monitor, track it, make sure there's no insider trading. A lot of your broker dealers and registered reps and people like that have to do the same thing so they can pay attention to it and see what's going on in your accounts. Life insurance is not reportable to those means. Why? Because they're not looking at the cash value. They're looking at the life insurance on that. So anyway, I know I'm a dork. It's really the third time that I've watched it, and I talked about it in my podcast the other day. But I think she really did do a really great job simplifying, what we talk about all the time. Why are taxes going to go up? We talk about that, right? Why are they going to go up? She just showed you in third grade math and third grade information exactly why they're going to go up and why probably it's not going to change. We probably are going to continue to be in a deficit. So many things, so many takeaways. Anybody have any questions from that information?
No, you just say that you're gonna post in the chat the link. Maybe
I
if
will.
you can,
Yes, I'll post the full link in there so you can watch the rest of it at the end of it. And then if you guys are appointed with North America, it came to your email too. So spoiler alert, sometimes those videos are really great. But if you guys have any questions, unmute yourself now and ask me or comments that you want to share. And if not, then we'll sign off for the day and blow kisses. All right. Oh, hey, Debbie. You have something?
Hey, no, I just wanted to say I really appreciate you bringing that to our attention. That's very eye-opening and an imperative for us to have that information. If we're going to be talking IUL, I'm just grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, I was blown away. You're welcome, very much so. And again, I'll post it in the WhatsApp so you guys have it. All right, guys, have a happy Wednesday. Enjoy your day. Thanks for watching my video. We'll see you soon.